Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where I'm coming to you again from the park where it's a kind of nice day. A little tired today because we got back really late last night from our weekend in Kanazawa. I think I mentioned in my last video that we were going to be going out of town this weekend, and we did go out of town. We left on Friday morning. Really long drive to the east coast of Japan, and we got to stay in a really nice Japanese ryokan, or traditional inn. While we were there, I shot a lot of video of this inn and some of the more interesting things around it, and I'm going to be putting those together into a video. So for those of you who would like to see what it's like in Kanazawa and in an onsen resort at a really nice Japanese ryokan, please check back or subscribe, and I'll have that video probably up maybe tomorrow or the next day. It's a little bit more complicated than my usual camera video, so I hope to make it come out pretty nice, so please check back and have a look at it. Anyway, the subject of today's video is another TLR, or twin lens reflex camera. This one here is the Beautyflex D, which was manufactured in Japan in about 1955. Beautyflex is a kind of not very well known manufacturer of cameras in Japan, and they specialize mainly in twin lens reflex cameras, though they did make a few 35mm rangefinder cameras as well. I think I might have done a video about one of the Beautyflex rangefinder cameras a year or so ago. So anyway, this is the TLR version. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store which is also called Japan Vintage Camera, so if you'd like to buy this camera or another vintage Japanese camera, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. So as I said, the Beautyflex camera was made in 1955, or this particular version, the Model D. The earlier versions of these cameras look a lot like the old Ricoflex cameras, with the gears around the lenses, and you turn the gears to make the lenses focus. The Beautyflex D is a much more advanced and refined design, with a conventional focusing knob located on the side and with a mechanical film counter. These were surprisingly well-made cameras, and I've sold a few of these in the past. Not a great deal because they weren't as popular as, say, like the Yashica or Ricoh cameras. It's kind of a shame because they really are quite nice. If you take a look at this one, you notice it's really in excellent condition. I got this in the mail this morning with a bunch of packages that were dropped off over the weekend, and it was still in its original case and still in its original box, and it was quite in beautiful shape. It looks like it was used for a short time back in the 1950s or so, and then just put away and forgotten until then. And luckily whoever had it kept it stored in a safe place, and that kept the camera in really wonderful condition. I especially love the leatherette, how nice and new it still looks after all of these years. Let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the Beautyflex D. We'll go ahead and start at the top here. You can kind of tell that this is a D version by this triangular emblem here, which is Beauty KK. KK is kind of a popular, I guess, expression in Japan, which stands for registered company. In Japanese, that's called Kabushiki Kaisha. And a lot of companies you see, if you look on the Japanese sites, they'll usually have a KK next to their name. So that's what that means here on the bottom. The viewfinder opens up just like pretty much any other TLR camera of this era, and the layout is pretty much the same. You'll notice that we have a small opening here on the back, and we have a square section on the front. If you push that in, it locks down in place and leaves the viewfinder open, and this works as a sports viewfinder. So if you're, there was a time actually when people used to use twin lens reflex cameras for shooting at sports, and so long as the camera was set to the infinity focus, say you're in the stands looking at a field, and you have a decently quick shutter speed, like on a sunny day you have it, say, set to f8 and say 1/300th of a second, you can get some pretty decent photographs without having to bother to focus. All you pretty much have to do is just wind and shoot. For the most part, We tend to use TLRs more carefully and for more close-up use. For example, shooting people in portraits. In that case, you would open the lens hood like this and simply push back this door a little bit to pop up the magnifying loop, and you focus through the camera, of course, looking through the top and turning the focusing ring until the image shows up in focus on the focusing screen. It's pretty much the same as the other TLR cameras which I have reviewed. On the side here we have the two main controls of the camera. We have the focusing mechanism, and we have a scale here on the side. In this case it's arranged in meters, and on the top here we have a depth of field scale, which tells you how much depth of field you have at any given aperture. We have the film counter dial, which is located here, and here we have the film winding knob. And on this camera, like the Yashica cameras, you simply wind this knob until it stops, and it should stop at the different numbers. And when the dial stops, you would charge the shutter, fire the shutter, push the button, and that allows you to wind to the next exposure. On the other side here, we don't really have much other than the two pins which are used to release the film spool and take-up spool. And here we have a cold shoe for mounting a flash gun, and here we have a socket for attaching the flash cord. So you can use a modern flash with one of these cameras, and using a PC sync adapter. These cameras actually work quite well if you use them with a flash, and I might have mentioned it in my last video about the Leotax camera that I'm often surprised when I try using one of these old cameras indoor with a flash, and the really good quality of the images I get from them. It makes me wish that I shot with a flash more often. Here we have the switch here where you can select between the flash sync speeds. You can use either a bulb flash on this camera or a strobe flash. We have this interesting original lens cap here, and it has a button in the center with arrows on either side. And to remove the lens cap, you kind of lift up on this button and it pops off. And gravity kind of holds it down. So when you put the cap back on, you just put it back on and let the gravity pull the pin down, and the lens cap stays put. So kind of interesting, and something which I haven't seen on other twin lens reflex cameras. So we have a couple of, we have the taking lens on the top, and this is a typical Tri-Lausar lens which was used on a large variety of different cameras. It was made by Tomioka, and it was one of Japan's leading optical companies of the time, and they produced lenses for Yashica and other makes, as well as even Polaroid. On the bottom here we have the Biocore lens, which is kind of a, I don't know, kind of a takeoff on the Rolleiflex Bio Matar lens. This is supposed to be an improvement over the original Tri-Lausar or Koki type lens, which came in the earlier Beautyflex cameras. Along the side here we have a couple of slide switches. On the right side we have the one which selects between the shutter speeds, and on the left side we have the settings for the aperture. And here on the top we have a shutter charging lever. So you simply charge the shutter by pulling the lever down, and release the shutter by pressing the shutter release button. We have a self-timer lever here on the side, and as always I recommend don't use the self-timer on these TLR cameras because it's the most fragile part of the camera and is prone to failure. If you happen to get it jammed or stuck or whatever, the first thing you can try to do to free it up is to put some lighter fluid on this and let it run down the switch into the mechanism of the shutter, and often that will free it up enough to where it works. If not, the only option you really have is to try to kind of force the lever up. You can apply a little bit of pressure to it, and that'll sometimes cause the mechanism to wind until it reaches the end of the travel. Then you can operate the shutter again. Sometimes if you just give it a, just push it. If it won't turn at all, just give it a push to the end. That'll break it on the inside, but it will also release its hold on the shutter mechanism and allow you to operate the shutter once again. You can use an accessory self-timer on these cameras. They had an adapter which screwed on, and you can see the threads here where my fingertip is around the shutter button. An adapter fits over the top, and you can plug in a self-timer here. It's kind of difficult on these cameras because if you put the self-timer, a lot of these have arms and stuff on them, and they might be in the field of view for the lower lens. But they did make some of these with kind of a cable type accessory, and you could attach the self-timer to the end of a release cable, and that made it much easier. If you're going to use a release cable on these, you'll need a similar kind of adapter for it. You can usually find these on eBay, sometimes you can find them on Amazon. This is a good camera for handheld use, like most TLR cameras are. These were actually very popular cameras with press photographers who didn't want to carry around the big 4x5 cameras, which were the mainstream workhorse of the press photographers from like the 20s to the 50s. These were a little bit faster to use. It was easier to wind from exposure to exposure, and the 6x6 format gave you plenty of resolution. So yes, these cameras can be used quite quickly. The one place where these cameras really excel is in portrait photography. So if you like taking pictures of people, say either their entire body or say from the chest up, these really catch a lot of detail. And the focal length on these cameras is usually around 80 millimeters or so, which in the medium format is almost kind of like in between, say, a wide angle and standard, maybe something more like a 40 millimeter lens in a 35 millimeter format. It doesn't distort the features or whatever on someone's face or whatever, though it can if you start to get very close to them. The best thing to do is kind of get back a little bit. But the dynamic range and I guess the resolution of medium format film really brings out the details when you take pictures of people. You get good details with the skin, the hair, the eyes, and things like that. And if you look, especially with more modern film, these cameras were really good performers back in the day when they were made with the like primitive 100 panchromatic film that they had back then. But nowadays in modern times they're even better than they were when they were produced. We'll go ahead and continue looking at a few other things. We have the latch on the bottom, which you open by turning this dial counterclockwise. That causes the catch to lift up, and the back door opens. A good feature that this camera has that other cameras like the Yashica Flex didn't have is an automatic frame counter reset, which is actuated by this lever here. On Yashica and some other cameras you have to reset the counter manually by pushing a couple of buttons. This one does it by itself. To load the film, it's quite easy. You would take your new roll of film, you would pull out this lever here, put in your film in the bottom, release this button so it holds the film in place, pull the film leader over the first roller here, feed it into the take-up spool on the top, and you would wind the film until the arrows on the film lined up with this red dot where my finger is right here. Maybe you can see it. Once the arrows are lined up with the red dots, close the film door and simply wind the camera. And this one has a film spool loaded in it. As I'm winding it, the film counter turns, and eventually it comes to the number 1 and stops like so. And then you would select your aperture speed, or excuse me, shutter speed and aperture. So in the conditions I'm in right now, I would say 1/50th of a second at around f5.6. If I were using, say, 400 speed film, I would charge the shutter, I would open the top, and off to the left here I have a really nice tree which I'm focusing at right now. When all this is set, push the shutter button, the shutter fires, then push the button on the side, listen for the click, wind it to number 2, and you're ready to take your second shot. And to proceed, push the button again, wind it to number 3, and so on. This is a 6x6 camera which uses 120 roll film. 120 roll film has a really long history. It's been in production since before 35mm film, and it still remains popular today. It's a little bit more expensive today than it used to be, but you can still find it on Amazon. Kodak still makes it, Agfa makes it, Rollei makes it, and of course Fujifilm produces it. And recently there have been a lot of Chinese makers who have started producing film. I guess there's quite the prices of Japanese and American film have gone up quite a lot in recent years, and now there's kind of a market for less expensive options. And so I noticed in Alibaba there are a variety of different films now being produced, and out of curiosity I'm probably going to pick up a few rolls of this and just see how well it works. One thing I like to do is use use used film in these cameras. I find that for sale quite often here in like the local auction sites and things like that. I can get a box of miscellaneous used film, 35mm and 120 film for maybe like $10 for an entire box of different kinds. Usually some of it's expired, but generally, unless it's really expired, it's still quite useful. You can also find a good assortment of unusual films on eBay. Sometimes if I'm looking for certain films that are a little bit more difficult to find here in Japan, eBay is always a good source. But yeah, film is not hard to find for these cameras, and processing is not so hard to find. You won't find any places which will do it in 1 hour, of course, but most photo labs know where they can send it off to get it sent, to get it processed, to have it back to you. And you can also have the images scanned onto a CD, so you can share your images online. I like to do the, I guess, processing and scanning myself. I bought an Epson flatbed scanner which handles medium format and even large format film. And when I'm shooting black and white film, like say Fuji Neopan or Kodak Tri-X, which is still made today, it's quite simple and inexpensive to do it yourself at home, and you get the film ready. You can say process it or develop it, dry it, and scan it and everything in a day. What I usually do is process the film in the evening and scan it in the morning, and then that gives the film time to dry and all that pretty well. And I really love the results. It's kind of a way that when I had more time, I used to relax after a busy day. I would take my film and take it out of the canisters or rolls, load it into the tanks, and mix up the chemicals, and it was kind of interesting, kind of like cooking or something else. And it's really wonderful to see the images come out on the negatives, and even more wonderful when you take a look at them on a monitor or on a print and see how wonderful they are. Anyway, it's getting a little bit late here. I've got other stuff to do. I've got to get a lot of orders and things shipped out. A lot of cameras will be going out tomorrow. It's been really busy lately here. I've received lots and lots of orders for cameras. Thank you guys very much for buying cameras from me. I'm getting them out as quickly as I can, and shipping companies trying to get them out as quickly as they can. Due to this supply chain issue that we've had, there are some delays, but nothing any too serious right now. So for those of you who ordered cameras and haven't received them yet, they should arrive anytime. Recent orders, they should arrive sometime next week. So anyway, that's it for my video today. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.